and heavily caffeinated.
All right, let's do this then.
This is the Jeff and Bill Show.
I don't agree with that.
They don't always agree, but hey, at least they have coffee.
Coffee.
And each other.
I love you, man.
God help us.
I want to bless him. We need all the help we can get.
Now here's Jeff Hunt and Bill Thorpe. The Jeff and Bill Show on News Talk 710 KNUS.
Seven a.m. in the Mile High City on this Friday, June 20th, 2025. Good morning, Denver, Colorado. You've tuned in to the Jeff and Bill Show, News Talk 710 KNUS. I'm your co-host, Jeff Hunt, along with Bill Thorpe, bringing you the freshest insights, hottest takes from the right, left, and center. As you remember, this week, big U.S. Supreme Court case. SCOTUS rules on state ban on gender transition, quote, treatments for minors in a landmark case. Fox News reporting that the Supreme Court ruled on Wednesday that a Tennessee law banning specific transgender medical treatments for adolescents in the state is not discriminatory, ruling 6-3 to uphold the law. At the issue in the case, U.S. versus Skermetti, was whether Tennessee's Senate Bill 1, which prohibits all medical treatments intended to allow a minor to identify with or live with a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex, or to treat purported discomfort or distress from a discordance between the minor's sex and asserted identity, violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The law prohibits states from allowing medical providers to deliver puberty blockers and hormones to facilitate a minor's transition to another sex. Well, interesting piece in the New York Times, how the transgender rights movement bet on the Supreme Court and lost. The inside story of the case that could set the movement back a generation. Here's what Bill and I will discuss after news and comment, and would love to hear from you. Is it now time to admit that these gender transition surgeries, as they are inflicted on minors, I don't really care what you do with your body. I do if you're an adult, but I'm not necessarily in the same position wanting to ban that as doing this to minors, because a lot of this is irreputable in the sense of it's irreversible. I think a lot of these changes can be permanent. It can result in sterilization. It can result in harm. I don't know if these kids know what they're doing and the long-term consequences of this. So, does Colorado need to follow the lead of Tennessee and ban transgender surgeries on minors? Or is Colorado a place of, quote, freedom, where parents and kids should be able to come and get these types of surgeries, this type of hormone therapy, those types of things done here in the state of Colorado? Want to hear from you. Phone line 303-696-1971. Or text us on the Dan Caplis Law text line 720-819-5115. Did the transgender community make a strategic mistake by pushing this hard this early? That's what the New York Times thinks. We'll get to this and more, but now is time for some news. Blake Olson's out. This is some national news.
A heat advisory is in effect through Saturday. It is going to be a hot one, 90s to near 100 degrees in Denver today, middle to upper 90s on Saturday, low to mid 90s Sunday. Nights will be in the 60s. It's also going to be breezy, brisk and sometimes gusty southwest winds. Noticeably cooler, though, by Monday. Highs by Monday only 70s, with thunderstorms returning Sunday night and Monday. Weather sponsored by Colorado's Best Roofing, reminding you to protect your home from the harsh Colorado weather and schedule your free no-obligation roof inspection today at roofingcolorado.com. That's roofingcolorado.com. Meteorologist Don Day in the 710 KNUS Weather Center.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. All right, Supreme Court saying that Tennessee's law banning specific transgender medical treatments for adolescents is not discriminatory and it needs to stand. About half the states in America ban specific transgender medical treatments as it relates to adults. Okay, this includes hormone therapy. It definitely includes top surgeries, bottom surgeries, mastectomies, castrations is actually what they are. But there's a big piece. I mean, this is like a 45-minute, hour and a half read in the New York Times. So over the weekend, if you want to read it, but it's how the transgender rights movement bet on the Supreme Court and lost. And they've got some interesting figures here.
Yeah, and it's an interesting backgrounder, too. If you've always been curious about, wait a minute, if you're of the mind that you feel like all of a sudden the trans issue became something that bubbled up to the top and almost like hit you out of nowhere, that, wait, I thought we were going this direction and now it became this cultural issue. This New York Times piece does a really good job of a timeline about how and why this grew and the change of some people inside of the community to go after laws and the idea of, okay, we've done it with gay marriage and now we need to change from gay marriage into the trans right, and that evolution and what they felt their strongest arguments were and how there were people on their side along the way that also raised red flags going, I'm not certain that this is going to give you the wins that you think it will, but how some early wins put the wind at their back and they felt they had this momentum. Yeah, continue. It's really interesting.
And you see it with the gays against groomers difference too. So there's an element within the LGBT community that actually wants to kind of, for lack of a better word, cut off the other letters.
That's awkward but accurate. Awkward but accurate, my friend.
The LGB and then the TQ and everything else goes with it. And it's fascinating to watch because this is not necessarily a coherent movement in itself as a one singular movement unless you put it in the context of it's a reaction against Judeo-Christian understandings of human sexuality. If that becomes your starting point, which is what was America's tradition, is that marriage is between one man, one woman, that sex should be within the context of marriage in a monogamous relationship, and then the 60s comes around and starts to fight back against that, and then LGBTQ is just a continuation of the rejection of the Judeo-Christian worldview when it comes to human sexuality. But some within the LGBTQ movement are going, hold on, there's different issues at stake here. And the way I see it is that the whole movement's going to run up against reality. And for me, it's not being discriminatory against the LGBTQ, any of those people in the alphabet. It is, from my perspective, you're going to run up against reality in the sense that there is a God. This God created the world. God speaks into the world. He designed it a particular way. And human sexuality was designed to be within the context of marriage and a monogamous relationship for the formation and creation of families. And so my rejection of LGBTQ isn't just about LGBTQ. It goes to the entire sexual revolution that began in the 60s that started to chip away at the Christian sexual worldview. So, but in this insight, what you get, and again, this is from the New York Times, is that some of the people that have been part of the LGB movement are saying to the TQs and the rest of them, you guys are pushing this way too hard, too fast. Possibly. But I think you have real public issues on the transgender element of this that kind of like ran into a brick wall. So I bring up men and women's sports, okay? That's probably the biggest, most public view of this. Bathrooms being a second one, and women's spaces. But public policy, if it doesn't purport with reality, gets rejected. And the reality is men and women are different in their strength and in their size and in their speed. And so when you come with this agenda and try to implement it and it runs up against reality and people don't like it, well, now they're starting to turn against the transgender issue. Then you get into minors, and in this case, the surgeries on minors. Bill, do you think that every state in America should ban transgender procedures on minors?
No, I don't think so. I don't at all. And I do agree, though, that the mistake that was made strategically, and we talked about this for months now, was the athletes. That was a difficult lift for the vast majority of individuals, including myself. And I'm a huge supporter of the community, but I can see the reason to not include trans athletes in certain sports activities. I can see the reason. And if I can, it means that's going to be a losing issue. I'm not saying that I represent a large portion of that community, but everybody listening to the Jeff and Bill show know that I'm much more open to that idea than Jeff is. And if you're losing someone like me, you're losing someone that is an advocate and an ally, then you've got a problem on that. And I think that's where they missed it. Some of the polls on even the bathroom and the trans people in private spaces was doable. It wasn't huge, but the trans athlete issue was very big. That, as far as a losing issue for the community, was enormous. And I think that was the real linchpin in where the social conversation turned. Because one of the things that I felt was really important in the gay rights movement was for them to be public and them to be around and understand the number of gay people that are in your community, and the fact that they go around and act and do things just like you. That, you know, their sexual orientation per se doesn't change whether or not they're sitting next to you, and it doesn't impact you whether or not you're sitting next to them in the classroom, or whether or not you're working at them at the job site, or just standing next to them at the grocery store. But the nature of being trans and having certain biological advantages inside the sports realm does mean the person standing next to you on that team can be different and can perform differently. It does mean the person on the other team has some specific advantages, and that is different. That's a different thing in which it impacts you in a very dynamic way that is vastly different than what it would do in almost any other social setting. Whether or not you meet someone at a party or at a public event that is trans is different than if you meet them on a sporting field. That's different. And so that's where I think they lost their way.
But do you think, let's go back to
please.
The minors and
absolutely.
And I think you make a good point there, by the way, about how you see it and the fact that it does actually impact your life, whereas, you know, part of the argument that came from the LBG side was this isn't going to impact your life.
Yeah,
I disagree with that, but you know, in your argument, yes, when you have a 6'5" male standing next to you while you're trying to play basketball, it's definitely going to affect your life.
Which is not the same if you're sitting next to them in an office setting, if they're in the next cubicle, if there's a salesperson, if in any other situation, that issue it doesn't change the dynamic, but it does when you're competing in sports. Continue.
So let's talk minors, though. Do you believe that these procedures are reversible?
Depends on which ones. And that would be the idea, because obviously some of the surgeries, no, not necessarily. Some of the hormone blockers and puberty blockers can be. Like when there are some that reduce bone density as they're going through and they're given to trans women. But if they come off of those blockers, the bone density does return. And there are supplements that can help with that bone density, because other people across the spectrum that identify as just, you know, other people, it's just, we have bone density issues in a lot of other. So we have medication that can help with bone density issues. So that I think that there are certain ones that absolutely can be reversible. I do have a question that was outlined very well in the New York Times article about whether or not some of the processes and procedures that were put in place were followed. And that concerns me, because I believe that there's this presentation sometimes about if you have a minor and the minor's trans, that getting them elective surgery is like going to McDonald's. That you just call up your doctor and go, hey, I want to take these parts off and put these parts on. When can we do it? Alrighty, next Saturday. Would you like to supersize it? That is kind of the impression. And that's not the technical way it's supposed to happen. It's supposed to be first discussed by the patient, and then with the parents, and then with the doctor and a therapist. There are theoretically 3 layers of adults involved in this, 2 of which have a speciality in dealing with this. And they should counsel and walk this individual through. And then when all 4 individuals involved in that decision agree, the surgery should go forward. But the New York Times article showed that in some cases, that wasn't always followed. And some ways it became just the advocacy of the individual became enough. And I do think that is a large portion of it. But there should be some other evaluations to make sure that they understand some of the changes, some of the consequences, and what goes on later in life. I also have an issue based on the starting age as far as where we're doing this. When you get into, they talked about 12 as far as the earliest, 12, 13, 14 to me seems a bit young. But I can see a case where it can honestly be trans that early. But I do have some questions. When you get older into the 15, 16, 17, I think we're getting closer to it. And of course, age of majority, I'm fine with it. That's your body, your choice at that point. And that is the part that I think hurt the movement the most as well on a medical side, is not having some of these stringent evaluations, especially the therapy side of things, just to make sure that this person is ready and set to do this. And if someone comes in as a counselor, I found this out after some of our other conversations, that the counselor, if you come in and say, I'm having issues with depression, the counselor can't say, no, you're not, you're wrong. The counselor is not able to do that in any situation. They can't. But they can counsel you through the discovery process to see if that's what it is and to walk you through it. But the one thing the counselor can't do if they want to keep their license is say, no, you're wrong about that. They can't.
With and there's gonna be a U.S. Supreme Court case coming from Colorado on this, because the question is this essentially state compelled speech to a counselor, that if you're a Christian family that doesn't believe in transgenderism, and you want to take your child who is struggling with gender dysphoria to a Christian counselor, by law right now, that counselor can only counsel that child to embrace transgenderism. Can't ask questions, can't go, hey, maybe you're going to grow out of this? No, do you want to see about that? Do you want to explore? Do you even want to just explore that option? I can't even ask you that question right now. I have to go, all right, Johnny, let's start getting the...
My understanding, though, is that's universal about anything that a patient comes in with. So it could be an eating disorder, it could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be anger towards my parents, that they can't turn and say, you're wrong. They can't do that. That's my understanding of it. I could be wrong, but my understanding of talking to a couple of therapists is if they go that route and start saying, no, you're wrong, let's go in a different direction, that they can lose their license on that. And it doesn't have to be with, and they're not talking about trans issues, they're talking about any issue.
No, but I think it is wrong, because I sat down there and worked on this bill. You have to... Like in a counseling session, like let's say you go in with your spouse to a counseling session. There's different options to pursue a broken relationship. One is we're going to try to work this through and see if we can come to a form of reconciliation. We may do a trial separation to see if that is going to work. We may get divorced. So you have different avenues in which you can guide somebody based upon what's best for them. Right? But with this restriction that's now going to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's been granted cert for a reason. I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court looked at this law and felt like it was important to address this. When a person comes in and says, I don't know if I'm in the right body, you, by law in Colorado, as a counselor, have to go, there's one thing for us to do. And let's start talking about how you're going to change your body.
See, I would disagree based on that premise. From my understanding of it, is it would be if someone comes in and says, I'm in the wrong body, you can't go the other direction. If they come in and say, I don't know, it opens up the possibility of exploration on both sides. And I think that's why this court case is needed, because I think that needs to be clarified. Just like in your counseling situation, the counselor, if the couple says, we want to have a trial separation, my understanding of the law in order to keep your license is that no, you guys can't do a trial separation. I recommend you do this. That's not the role of the counselor. The counselor can say, can we explore? Can we look at that idea? But if the couple comes in and says, this is the direction we want to go, or we're going through this in divorce and we're going to have divorce, the counselor can't go, let's counsel you to stay together. They have to continue on the path. So that, again, I have a question about whether or not legally what that issue is. And if it is right that the person comes in and says, I don't know, and they're only allowed to advocate for one side, yes, that is an issue. So that, I think there's a question here, and that's why I think they're taking up the case.
So let's go back to this law in Tennessee. Okay. Is there any line you would draw with regards to minors and transgender procedures? Would you ban actual top surgeries? What they call tops. It's a mastectomy, or a breast implant, or bottom surgeries, which is a castration. Those types of things. Should those be banned in the state of Colorado for minors?
For me, the easiest one would be what we're going to for the discussion called a bottom surgery. That's the easiest one because it is the one that is most medically invasive. And because of development and healing, some other things like that, that's where I would go, is I would absolutely put a ban on that. Because functionally, you're not necessarily, when you're younger age, you're not sharing those parts of people all the time. So the other part being that it does allow for the transition later on. And from the studies that I've seen and looking at it, that bottom surgery is incredibly rare for minors and is more prominent in people above the age of 18. And that, to me, seems like that's exactly where this should be, that it should be post 18 once you want to make that decision. Okay, and you know all the issues and things contained therein. So I'm against that one. The top surgery or the mastectomies, I'm a little more amenable about. I can see the reason why or why not. I would allow that to occur only because, and this is what shocked me, is I saw a study that looked at 5 years. I think it was 2019 forward, and it was 3 to 5 years of a study, and 40% of the breast reductions, mastectomies, were done on what you consider straight boys, not trans kids. 40% on boys that identify as boys. 40% of it. And so
help me understand why they're getting a mastectomy if they're boys.
Man boobs.
Oh, just
boobs.
But not out of an effort to change their gender.
No, but
almost like a plastic surgery.
Yeah, like a plastic surgery. But that's the issue, is if we're going to allow it, if we're going to say no, these trans kids can't have it, but these kids that say that are boys that say they're boys can, we're misapplying the law. So it has to be one or the other. And if we're going to say that we can't,
you think so?
Yeah, we absolutely. Yeah,
I actually see them different.
Yeah, well, I know you see them different, but it's equal application of the law. You're saying that one group can have them and one group can't, simply because I may or may not disagree with this particular behavior or identification, and you can't do that. You just can't.
Well, no, I'd almost see it like removing a mole.
In what way?
Right, because one is like if you're dealing with boys, and I would much rather be in the position of going, no, get it on a workout regime. But if you're obese to the point where you have stretchy skin, or there's some health related issue there to where having a reduction of man boobs helps your back or something like that, that's different than embracing what I consider a mental health issue and then adjusting your body in an effort to fulfill a mental health issue that could lead to bigger problems later. I just see them totally differently.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is that you're looking this as a mental health issue.
Yes.
That somehow, and I push back on that a lot because I went through the era where being gay was a mental health issue, and that's a biological issue. And from what I've seen with this, it's also a biological issue. And so that's where I come
even
from.
the side calls it gender dysphoria.
Yeah, and we called it that confusion we called it that when it was also gay, when you were gay. Gay was originally a mental disorder. So yeah, I understand. And it can be a dysphoria as far as feeling like you're in the wrong body, but there can be a biological reason behind it. But regardless of that, the issue being that you're saying that one group of people can make the choice and the other group can't, simply because I agree with this group and I disagree with that group. I need an equal application of law.
No, I think the facts are different.
No, I need an equal application of the law, because this person may want, the person that you're talking about with the flabby skin or wants to look better, that's the same fundamental motivation behind the trans person. They want to look better. They're embarrassed about how they look. They're embarrassed about their appearance. They want to appear a different way. It's the same reason you're taking the man boobs off the fat kids.
I think it's different. There's an actual biological reality versus a mental health issue.
I know.
One is you're trying to address, I don't know, sagging skin or back issues or whatever. I don't know why a 15-year-old man would get a breast reduction surgery, but
isn't it mental?
But what you're happening on the other side? No, I think it's actually physical.
Well, here's the thing: because here's the idea: is I doubt there are that many teenage boys that have boobs that are large enough to cause back issues. That is enormous.
Right. And so
I discount that. So I
discount
discount
me in a place where I don't even know why they would get it.
I know, but
I'm having to defend it.
I know, and that's the thing. And again, that's what shocked me. It shocked me, the fact that I found that 40% during these years were boys that identified as boys. And the issue being that
the other 60% were trans?
Yeah. And so, but what we're looking at is this. And there are some other reasons inside of that too. Some were medical. There's some early diagnosis of breast cancer, but that's a fraction of a percent. Some stuff like that. But at the core, because it isn't really necessarily physical, at the core it is image-based for those teenage boys, because they don't have back issues with it because of, it's flabby skin, it's the appearance, it's not wanting to look. So again, that
Bill,
would be mental. Based on your qualifications, that would be a mental issue.
And somebody that's dealing with gender dysphoria is wrong. And I think it's important as a society to address this. This becomes the gist of the debate in this article.
Yeah,
I think, and the transgender movement. Who are you?
What do you mean by that? Help me understand.
In this article,
yeah,
and within the trans movement, the emphasis on identity is who you identify as. Right, so it's like a kind of a soul. There's a part of your being that exists. We can't point to it. You can't find it under a microscope, but I think we would all agree it's a soul. And whatever that soul thinks it is what it is who you are. So, Chase Strangio, who's the guy that they bring up in this article, pushes back on the idea of I was born male. He hates that language. Okay, and this gets into Ryan. Oh gosh, I'm totally forgetting his last name right now. But he wrote a book, When Harry Becomes Sally, on the philosophical issues at stake here. What makes you who you are? In the trans movement, you are what your soul identifies as. And you essentially just wear a meat skin. He makes the argument, I was never a man at birth, or I was never a woman at birth. I've always been a male, even though I was just in a woman's body, and he won't even call it a woman's body. He says it's just a thing that I have. And so he ended up having top surgery. But he wants, in his worldview, your body, your skin is just a meat suit that you wear, and your true identity is found in your soul. Now, this was an actual heresy that the church had to confront. Primarily came out of Egypt early on in church history, called Gnosticism. That almost the exact same thing, that your soul is ultimately what matters. Your body is just kind of this dirty little thing you got to deal with. And the church rejected it, saying, no, you are together. You are one together. And so that becomes the impetus of the actual foundation of this debate. Because what the trans community is saying, and what I hear you saying and others, is that the real identity the core of who that person is what their soul says it is, and their body is just something that can be changed. Your thoughts?
It could also be what their biology says it is. Because, again, we've gone back and forth on this on the show, that while it is easy to say that sex is binary, it's not. There are more subsets of that than just XX and XY. There are numbers of subsets, and there's even instances of individuals that have XY chromosomes and their cells don't recognize male hormones, and they develop as female, despite the fact that they hold XY chromosomes. So biologically, they are what we would consider male. But physically, they develop as female because their body doesn't recognize the hormone. Now, that is not because they went to some drag queen story hour. That biology did not occur because they were indoctrinated by some program, some person, some school. That didn't happen. That is the core of their genetic code that was created at conception. That's who they are. And that's why I disagree on the idea that this is something that is a mental illness. To me, I see more and more of this being biological in nature. And I heard these same arguments again about the mental illness, about the choices during the whole homosexual argument. The number of times I had people say, oh, I couldn't choose to be gay. But the issue is it's not a choice. And I think that's where this argument kind of breaks apart, is that there's a whole people, including yourself, that believes this is a choice. And I disagree, because I can't see why these individuals would ever choose to put themselves through this kind of pain.
But don't you see that within the LGBTQ movement, there's this argument that I was born gay and that I can change my gender on a daily basis? Happening at the same time? So,
yeah, I think there are some people that gender fluidity is something that I have a little bit of a problem with getting my head around sometimes conceptually. I am not opposed to it, but that to me is a little bit different than the idea of someone that is just saying, rather than saying I can switch it back and forth, okay, we can deal with that later, but can we just deal with the individuals that say I am this singular thing?
But you're dealing too with people like this guy Chase Stangio, who's the lead arguer in the Supreme Court case, who's saying, no, identity exists in the soul, not in the body. Therefore, if the soul today feels like a they, them, and then tomorrow feels like a he, him, they should be able to do that. And it just bounces back and forth. It just changes. But then the gay movement was saying, no. The reason why you can't write these laws against me is because this is something I didn't choose this. I was born gay. So in on one hand, you have my identity's based in my biology, and then you have, no, my identity's based in my soul identity, and we have to somehow make that work in law.
Oh, yeah. And some of the premise of when he's arguing the idea that the soul feels this way, I somewhat disagree with, because some of the research that I've seen shows that when you have like an XXY, so 3 chromosomes, that you can have the feelings of both. And that's where I'm curious about, is those individuals that feel they're gender fluid. I'm curious about chromosomes, because I'm guessing, and no particular research, and no one's done any research on this that is significant that I've seen, that could be part of it, that they could have additional chromosomes, and that happens. And one of the things we also have to deal with, and this is just a side note, is that as far as evolutionary biology, our Y chromosome is disappearing as far as how it permeates and how it develops. So there are some biological changes going on just in the larger sphere of DNA that has zero to do with people having surgeries or going to drag queen story hours or seeing things on TV. That there's an evolutionary change that is happening inside the larger human population. We're not going to see it for generations and generations. I mean, thousands of years down the road is when this will actually, anything that is significant. But yeah, it's happening.
Let's get to a break. Invite people to come into this conversation. Join us. I think that transgender procedures on minors is leftist, godless child abuse. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
is it compassionate care for people dealing with gender dysphoria? Give us a call, 303-696-1971. text us on the Dan Caplis Law text line at 720-819-5115. Would love to hear from you. You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Ron from Greeley is up next. We've got a phone line open for you.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. We're talking the Tennessee Supreme Court decision, or the Supreme Court decision about the Tennessee law. An important reminder, text message here, that the Supreme Court's decision found that the law could stand because it was based on age, that it didn't specifically violate the rights of transgender or a particular protected class. And in this case, it's a reminder at the national level and at some state levels, the LGBT community is not a, quote, protected class.
That's interesting. We should delve into that in a little bit after the phone calls. That's interesting.
Let's go to...
That's where I think that the court sort of tied themselves in a bit of a linguistic knot. But we'll talk about that in a sec.
Great. Let's go to phone lines. By the way, great discussion with Bill. That's a conversation that's not happening on any other show. And Bill and I have gotten to a place where we don't necessarily rip each other to pieces when we debate.
It was one of those things afterwards we're like, hey, we pulled that off pretty well. We didn't. Yeah, we've hit this. And again, we appreciate you spending time with us this morning, but we challenge you to think of any other local talk or news outlet that would have this discussion this openly, this honestly, on this level. In fact, we'll challenge you to find a national outlet that'll do it the way that we do it here. We're different. Let's
go to Ron Greeley. Good morning, Ron. You're on with Jeff and Bill.
Morning.
Morning, guys. I mean, you guys actually sit and have breakfast or coffee together?
Yeah, we do, actually. We hang out a little bit before the show and everything else. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's really cool. I think we've hit a nice rhythm. And thanks for playing along, man. Ron, what's on your mind?
Right. Hey, so what did, how did you end that, Jeff? You said something as far as religious. I didn't quite catch all that. What did you say?
Well, I think transgender procedures, medical procedures upon minors is leftist, godless child abuse.
Absolutely. Especially on minors. And even Billy, what I liked where he agreed is as far as the bottom half, to be polite, I suppose, is absolutely off the table. That is horrific.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I agree there. Right when I'm agreeing with Jeff on other stuff, Bill comes up with some pretty good argumentative points that makes this topic just the probably the biggest head scratcher you can ever have. Right when you're thinking, okay, this makes sense, the other one, well, yeah, that makes sense too. And that's what I think causes such problems, because you're right, Bill, when you're saying as far as somebody having a mental problem, right? Or is Jeff the one that thinks the mental problem as far as for sex, as far
Jeff
as gender? Yeah, and I agree with that. And as far as the boys wanting to have, I don't know, is it technically? I mean, technically, maybe it's a mastectomy, but isn't it just removal of fatty tissue?
And that's where in my world it's more of like a cosmetic procedure that's not trying to do what I think is an error. And the error is that you can somehow Frankenstein your body to look like a different gender in order to satisfy what I think is a incorrect worldview of yourself. So your soul or whatever in your body is saying, let's say you're a boy, you're born a boy, and your soul in your body says, I'm actually a girl. So now you're going to Frankenstein your body in order to make it look like that. And I think that's I think the facts are different in that case than a man trying to get breast reduction because it's a fatty tissue that has grown.
Well, yeah, there's actually been studies done, and I mean, I'm sure Bill could find them as far as the statistics that show that there's actually, it's a high percentage of people that have gone either way that in the future regret what they did. Now, we can't say now, I mean, on a lot because it's so fresh, especially for kids, but they're saying there was an adult that had it done years ago. He was an adult when he did it, and then 8 years go by, and they regretted doing it. And they're speaking out as far as allowing minors to do this because it is horrific. And is it still in California to where you don't need the parents permission? Is that still on the table right now? Is that still happening?
I don't know specifically.
I could tell you, at least here in Colorado, you can have counseling sessions. The person can begin to change their identity, not necessarily take hormones. That's debatable. And maybe somebody who's a better expert on this can let me know. But there's a lot of stuff that can already take place in Colorado without parental notification.
Yeah, and that's in California. You go to a school, the school will actually help you take hormone-changing pills and even see about doing surgeries without parents' permission. There was a story of a guy that left Texas, or a woman that left Texas because her husband did not like, they had twins.
Yeah.
One identified as a girl, one didn't. And so the mom says, we're moving to California. He tried to fight it. He couldn't. He has to stay under CPS while he's visiting his child to make sure that he doesn't try, like you were saying, as far as counseling. You can't tell him, no, I think this is a phase. You can't be going through this. None of that's allowed. And, when I talk to some people that aren't quite educated in this area, they laugh when they hear the schools have more say than parents. And it's like, no, you seriously need to look into it because schools have so much power over the kids. It's scary.
Yeah. Ron, appreciate the call. Ron from Greeley.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great weekend. Thank you for the call. His line will be open 303-696-1971. We're talking transgenderism, the Supreme Court case regarding Tennessee, and should Colorado end providing trans medical procedures to minors? Join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's Talk Leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. We're talking the Supreme Court ruling in transgenderism, and now there's a Supreme Court case coming from Colorado regarding counselors in transgenderism. Let's go to John and Thornton. Good morning, John. You're on with Jeff and Bill.
Yeah, morning.
Yeah, how are you guys doing?
Good. How are you? What's on your mind?
Good. I was just calling in response to the argument was made basically that these, the trans identities couldn't be considered mental disorders because there's some sort of biological underpinning. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so the biological underpinnings you discussed, such as chromosome abnormalities, Fragile X, androgen insensitivity, those are a couple examples. Those are extraordinarily rare, right? They're a fraction of a percent of the population. So if that was the explanation as to why people are becoming trans, you'd expect there to be a pretty strong relationship in the proportions of the population. In other words, if let's say 0.2% of people have these genetic abnormalities, and that's the explanation, then 0.2% of people would be trans. But that's not the case. There are far more trans people than there are people with these genetic abnormalities. So it doesn't make a lot of sense as an explanation.
But I put it on the table as far as part of the explanation. That couldn't that play into it? Just like we can't necessarily point to any genetic or chromosomal issue as far as why someone is necessarily gay, but it is a biological determination. So that's the idea too. That
Entirely?
Even though we can't,
You think it's entirely biological?
Yeah, and I mean
I
90% of the
that.
time, absolutely, because we see it elsewhere.
Well, 90% of the time would make no sense because we're talking about rates of 5 to 10% of people being trans now.
Wait,
and we're
hang on,
talking
hold on,
about, like,
John, just for a sec. Hold on. The 90% makes no sense in which one? Me talking about trans people or me talking about gay people? Which one are we talking about here that you feel is incorrect?
I'm talking about
90%?
trans people. I'm
Okay.
talking about trans people. I would completely separate these
Okay,
things.
because the 90%, I said the 90% was in response to the idea of the gay people. So you're just you're cross-equating them. So, okay, let's go back to the trans issue.
Well, you're talking about them in the same conversation. I would separate
yes.
this, right? So it's not a good explanation for trans identities because these are such rare genetic abnormalities that they can't possibly be an explanation for all of the people identifying as trans, particularly because the number is growing at such an alarming rate. The other thing I would say is that, these are abnormalities, right? The genetic components, right? So we can find physical abnormalities that we wouldn't define as normal because people have them. Some people are born without an arm. Because that happens doesn't mean it's normal.
Okay, but you would say that based on percentage of the population, being gay isn't necessarily normal. If we would do it the same way, but you wouldn't say that we then bifurcate them outside of society and don't treat them as equals. So just because it's not part of the majority doesn't mean that they don't exist or have the ability and that it's wrong. Correct? You wouldn't make that argument. It kind of sounds like what you're saying.
Guys, we're up against a break. John, stick around. We can continue this. You're listening to Jeff and Bill.
KNUS.